If you love intricate plots, powerful emotions, and a story that explores the depths of human nature, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I will be reviewing Othello, the Moor of Venice by William Shakespeare. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're taking a look at another one of Shakespeare's tragedies. And again, I would say this is one of his plays it's not his most famous tragedy, but it's certainly up there. This is possibly one that you would have read in high school, or maybe you took a college class, but I do think this is one that you are likely to engage with. It's a fascinating play. We'll certainly engage with some of the things that make it very pertinent today, but also a challenge to read today, especially as we look at its discussion of race relationships and attitude towards race. But as usual, let me give you my act-by-act summary of what is going on in Othello. In Act 1, the play begins in Venice with Iago, a soldier, expressing his anger at Othello, who is a Moorish general. Of course, Moor is a term for someone that comes from North Africa that was famous for taking part in the conquest of Spain. It's a bit of a complicated term, in part because it was used more broadly in Europe to reference almost anyone that was black or anyone that was Muslim. And so for those reasons, it's kind of a complicated term, but it was a broadly used term by the Europeans at this point in time. So that is what we mean by a Moorish general, despite, of course, coming from somewhere besides Venice or from Italy. So the idea is for him to be a little bit foreign, a bit exotic perhaps, at least in his description, but also to be incredibly capable. If you know anything about Venice in this time period, it would have been one of the more international cities in all of Europe, and that is why you would have a Moorish general. Iago is expressing his frustration over Othello, especially because Othello had been promoted over him. The ruler Cassio had promoted Othello over Iago. This is going to be the situation that sets the frame for the rest of the play. You're going to see Iago try to manipulate individuals like Rodrigo, who is a suitor of Desdemona, to inform her father, whose name is Brabantio, that she has eloped with Othello. Brabantio is, of course, enraged, and he accuses Othello before the Duke, but Othello defends his love for Desdemona, who confirms their marriage was consensual. In other words, you can again see some suggestions that was forced upon them. This would have been playing at the time into some perceptions and stereotypes about Muslims, and the Duke actually sides with Othello and sends him to Cyprus to defend against an impending Turkish invasion. In Act 2, or in Cyprus, Iago's scheming has continued to take root. The Turkish fleet is actually destroyed by a storm, leaving Othello and his forces safe. Cassio, who is Othello's lieutenant, and so then Iago is going to be successful at manipulating Cassio, and he is going to get him drunk and going to get him to fight Rodrigo, and the result is going to be Cassio's demotion. Remember, it's Cassio that had promoted Othello in the first place, and Iago advises Cassio to seek Desdemona's help in regaining his position, planting the seeds of jealousy in Othello's mind. In Act 3, we will see Iago's plot deepen as he uses Desdemona's innocent attempt to intercede for Cassio to make Othello suspicious. Othello's trust begins to waver, and Iago cunningly suggests that Cassio and Desdemona are having an affair. He even plants Desdemona's handkerchief, which is a token from Othello, in Cassio's possession as false evidence, and Othello is going to become consumed by jealousy, and he vows to seek revenge. In Act 4, Othello's jealousy grows to a fever pitch as Iago continues to feed him lies, and Othello confronts Desdemona and accuses her of infidelity despite her pleas of innocence. And in a moment of doubt and even a moment of vulnerability, Othello becomes resolute in his belief of her betrayal. And Iago's wife, Emilia, is actually going to unknowingly aid the plot by providing the handkerchief, though she remains totally unaware of her husband's true motives. You can see how he has continued his manipulation to include even his own wife. In Act 5, Iago's scheme reaches its tragic climax. He manipulates Rodrigo into attacking Cassio. Of course, Cassio survives, and Othello is convinced of Desdemona's guilt and kills her in their bedroom. It is an incredibly intense and gruesome scene in which he chokes her. Emilia exposes Iago's treachery and she actually reveals the truth about the handkerchief. And of course, Othello realizes his fatal mistake far too late, and Othello takes his own life in despair. Iago is arrested, but there's no say about his ultimate fate. It does appear as though it had been proven that he had been behind all of this scheming. It is a play full of emotions. It is a play full of modern day problems. Again, a reference to the issues of race and some senses of xenophobia and even some Islamophobia, and even also just issues of relationships and the perception of women and this obsession with women's purity and their fidelity to the extent of their own demise. Othello, the Moor of Venice, it is actually usually just called Othello. It was probably written around 1603 by Shakespeare, and I already gave you all the summary. It is generally considered one of Shakespeare's best tragedies, considering all the emotions and all the potent forces that are being explored and examined in that, and of course all of the more problematic things that I've already mentioned. Since its debut, Othello has been celebrated for its dramatic power, and it has inspired a wide variety of adaptations, numerous stage and film and even operatic adaptations. And the roles of Othello and Iago and Desdemona and Emilia are seen as particularly demanding and highly sought after by actors. I remember doing a read-through in high school in drama, and I remember Iago's lines in particular were very long, and it took a lot of effort to understand exactly what was going on. I would say that scholars have long examined the play's unique structure and its tragic elements, and especially its exploration of race, which is very hard to do if you are not going to put the effort into contextualizing the concept of race at the time, and of course the relationship between the Moors and Venice in particular, and larger attitudes towards the different countries and regions of the world, especially since this is being written by Shakespeare in England. So you could see all these things that would make it even more complicated to fully appreciate it. But that being said, I do think you can still find resonance with it to this day as you consider what types of things make it difficult to have a fruitful discussion about race and the impact of race on relationships and on a society. It is believed that Shakespeare drew inspiration for the play from a novella by an author named Cinthio, but he, of course, reshaped the story significantly to fit his thematic vision. And while not among his longest works, Othello certainly features two of Shakespeare's most extensive roles with Othello and Iago. Like I said, they both talk a lot. That is one of the things that make their roles so demanding. I would say, for that reason, that it also gives us some great quotes. Some that are humorous, at least to me they came off as humorous, maybe they weren't meant to be, but then also some very profound ones, as well as ones that I think you would recognize it, referencing idiomatic phrases. For example, I think the best example of that would be, "Oh, beware, my lord of jealousy, it is the green-eyed monster, which doth mock the meat it feeds on." So that reference to jealousy and being a green-eyed monster. Another one would be, "But I wear my heart upon my sleeve, for daws do peck it, I am not what I am." So again, a reference to wearing your heart on your sleeves, being open with your emotions. And then it has some more humorous ones. "She gave me for my pains a world of sighs." I'm not sure that was meant to be funny, but I just loved that. Transposing that into like an exasperated attitude. "I would not put a thief in my mouth to steal my brains." Of course, the impracticality of reason and challenging how you might reason something or something that you see with your own eyes. "I understand a fury in your words, but not your words." So again, this idea of I can understand what you're saying, even though I don't know what you're saying, based off of emotion. "Men should be what they seem." In other words, integrity of appearance. All that goes to the heart of this question of betrayal and loyalty in this play. "Men in rage strike those that wish them best." That, of course, is a reference to how people strike out when they hear something that they don't want to hear. One of my favorite lines is, of course, "For she had eyes and chose me." I find that one a bit more inspiring than the others in terms of recognizing that, at the heart of all of this and this question of loyalty and fidelity is the idea of he, despite being different in any way, she chose him and she made it a choice. Of course, the concept of marriage and how people dated and met would be very different at the time period, but that's going to be one of those ones that I like to transpose on current times when I think of dating and relationships and choosing a companion. There's a lot in this play, a lot about jealousy and, of course, the betrayal and the destructive nature of the manipulation that Iago is performing. And, of course, how far Iago is going to get revenge for just being slighted. This by no means ended his career. He still had a successful career, yet he chooses to go after someone that he holds responsible, even though it appears that he did not deserve to be promoted as opposed to Othello. And so you can certainly see a lot of the consequences of all of the different things that Iago is doing to try to get revenge, but it has these severe long-term consequences, and of course ultimately ending in those climactic scenes of a fair amount of death. And I think that just shows the wide range of emotions and how impactful emotions can be, especially if we don't check them. I also think that there's a good deal of commentary on this perception of women's purity, and I do think that there's a fair conversation in there about just how dated exactly the representation of purity is in this, or how problematic that characterization might be. Yeah, I mean, all that being said, who would I say this is for? Well, I would certainly say that it is for people that love the classic tragedies of Shakespeare, and they are ready to engage with a play that certainly has problems. Absolutely, I'm not going to pretend like it doesn't, but it also has a lot of good stuff in there to explore. I do think this is, in some respects, I know that I said it's considered one of his greatest plays, but I would say that most people, it's not going to be one of the first 5 or 6 Shakespeare plays that they read. And I would recommend that more people do pick it up, especially if you are looking for a play that you didn't necessarily read in high school, but you liked what you read in high school. This would be a great one to pick up. I really think this is incredibly potent and thought-provoking and reflective play that I would encourage pretty much anyone that has any real interest in Shakespeare, especially if you have a little bit of Shakespeare under your belt already. I would certainly recommend this one. Who would I not say this is for? Well, as usual, if you're not a fan of Shakespeare, I don't think you're going to love this. If you're going to struggle with some things that are clearly dated in terms of representations and perceptions, then this is probably not going to be for you either. Or if you just don't want another tragedy when you are reading Shakespearean plays, then I also don't totally blame you on that. It took me a long time to come around to Shakespearean tragedies. I certainly did not care to read them in high school as much as I preferred the comedies, but I would say as I get older, I certainly have a greater appreciation for the tragedies, and Othello would certainly be one of them. Of course, I would like to know your thoughts on this. Please let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on those notifications, and until next time, keep those pages turning.